Okay, Genesis chapter 16. A couple of weeks ago, we spoke on the subject of Jireh and Shiloh. Jireh means the God who provides. That one of his names. God has got many, many names. And one of the names that was given to him was by Abraham. And he says, God will provide. He is our provider. Jehovah Jireh, God our provider. And so today we're going to look on the subject of El Roi, the God who sees, or the God who sees me. El means God, and then Roi, the God who sees, okay? So we're going to look at Genesis chapter 16. And it says, now Sarah, Abram's wife, this is Abram before he had his name changed to Abraham, had borne him no children. She had a female Egyptian servant whose name was Hagar. So she said to Abram, the Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her. Abram agreed to what Sarah said. So after Abram had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarah, his wife, took to her Egyptian slave Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. He slept with Hagar and she conceived. When she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. Then Sarah said to Abram, you're responsible for the wrong I'm suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and now that she knows she's pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me. Your slave is in your hands, Abram said. Do with her whatever you think best. Then Sarah mistreated Hagar, so she fled from her. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. And he said, Hagar, slave of Sarah, where have you come from and where are you going? I'm running away from my mistress, Sarah, she answered. Then the angel of the Lord told her, go back to your mistress and submit to her. The angel added, I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count. The angel of the Lord also said to her, you're now pregnant. You will give birth to a son. You shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. He will live in hostility toward all his brothers. She gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her, El Roi, you are the God who sees me. For she said, I have now seen the one who sees me. That is why the well was called Ber Lahai Roi. It is still there between Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram gave him the name Ishmael. Abram was 86 when Hagar bore him Ishmael. This is the story of Abram and one of his mess-ups. Because if you know anything about the history of Abraham, Abraham was given this promise by God. He's already been on this journey where God has called him from the land that he lived in, saying to him, I'm going to show you a land, and I'm going to give you that land, and you and your descendants are going to take possession of this land. This land we know today is the nation of Israel. And God gave him a promise, and he said, your descendants are going to be like the stars of the sky and like the sand in the desert. They're going to be too numerous to count. Abraham, there's going to be loads. And years go by, and Abraham is married to a woman by the name of Sarah, and they don't conceive. God has given him this promise, but Sarah can't get pregnant. And they're wondering, okay, what's going on here? What are we going to do? And Sarah comes up with a plan. And so in verses 1 to 3, Sarah has this idea in Genesis chapter 16. They're kind of like, okay, you know what? This isn't happening for us. This isn't, I don't know what's going on here, but it's just not happening. We need to, perhaps maybe in some way, let's help God out here. Maybe the promise is for you, Abraham, and it's not going to be through me. So let's help God out. Let's fix this on his behalf. And so Sarah comes up with this idea, comes up with this plan. You know what? We've got a slave girl here. Her name is Hagar. Abraham, why don't you go and sleep with her, and maybe she'll get pregnant, and sometimes we come up with really stupid solutions to problems, don't we? Really silly, stupid solutions, and we give ourselves sometimes the worst advice that we could ever give, and it actually makes things worse. I don't know if you've ever been in that position where it's like things are bad, but then you give yourself some advice, and you're like, okay, we're going to do this here, and it actually makes it worse. Maybe that's just me. How could, she says, okay, you know what? Maybe I could build a family through Hagar. How would that even be possible? Because any kids born to Hagar still won't be hers. They'll be Hagar's. And yet this is what's running through her mind. They're never going to be hers. And we make stupid, rash decisions based on emotion and based on the difficult situations that we're going through. Instead of maybe at some point taking a step back, taking a breath and thinking clearly before we make a major decision and a major choice in life. And so Sarah comes up with this idea. Abraham, we got Hagar here. It's kind of funny, I think anyway, because Abraham doesn't put up much of a fight. I mean, whenever you read through here, it says, the Lord has kept me from having no children. He says, go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her. Abraham agreed to what Sarah said. You don't kind of read anything in here about Abraham saying, well, let's give it another try. Let's give it another couple of months. And then, I'm not too sure, Sarah. It's kind of like, Sarah's like, go take Hagar. Here, Abraham's like, okay, I can do it. Maybe she was really, really good looking, and Abraham's getting on in years. Maybe she was a younger model, and Abraham wasn't putting up much of a fight then. He's like, okay, we can do this. And they go through with this. And Hagar gets pregnant, gives birth. Well, it's just the moment that we're reading here is just about Hagar being pregnant. And this is where it kind of gets a bit messy, because Sarah's now jealous and despises Hagar. It was her idea, and then she's going to Abram and saying, Abram, look what's going on here. So, she's making fun of me, because she's pregnant and I can't get pregnant. And so then there's this argument between Abraham and Sarah, and Abraham's like, well, it was your idea. You do with her whatever you want. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Adam and Eve whenever they're in the Garden of Eden. And Eve falls prey to the serpent, and she eats of the forbidden fruit, and then she goes to Adam, and Adam eats of the forbidden fruit, and then God comes, and then they're all beginning to fight amongst each other, and Adam's blaming Eve, and Eve's blaming the serpent, and everybody's blaming everybody else, and nobody's taking responsibility for their own decisions and their own choices. How much do we do that whenever we're the ones that mess up? But it was their fault. Because if they hadn't have done, then I wouldn't have, and if they didn't do that, then I wouldn't have done. It's always someone else's fault, and maybe at some point we've got to say, okay, you know what? I'm going to take responsibility. But from now on, I'm going to take a step back before I make any rash decisions and any rash choices in my life. And so there's this argument that goes on, and I think that, whenever we look at the Bible and it says about how sin came in through Adam, that Adam had the responsibility. He should have taken responsibility. Abram should have taken responsibility here. Whenever Sarah gave him a get-out clause, Abram should have said, no. God gave us a promise. God gave us a promise. It's going to come through us. Abraham messes up, and there's this argument, and Hagar ends up fleeing from the scene in verse 6. And then in verse 7 and verse 8, it says that the angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. And he said to Hagar, slave of Sarah, where have you come from, and where are you going? Shur means a wall. It demonstrates something that there's an obstacle, a blockage there. It means the place of a wall. And I wonder today, have you ever run into a brick wall during your life? Not physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually. This is what's happening with Hagar. She's running, she's asked a question, she's asked two questions, but she only answers the first, which is the easy one to answer. Where are you coming from, And where are you going? She answers, I've been running from my mistress, and I've hit a brick wall. I've hit a brick wall in my life. I don't know, maybe that's you today. Maybe at some points in your life, you feel like you have hit a brick wall. And she stops. She stops. Where are you coming from? And where are you going? I think the answer to the first one can be relatively easy because very often we know what we're running from. Maybe a number of us in this place, we have spent time running away from something. And we know we're running away from something, but it's also very difficult, I think, to understand where we're running to. Where we're running to, because I think that very often we spend a lot of our time running away from stuff and we're preoccupied with what we're running away from, that we don't give much consideration to where we're actually going. We sang a song just to finish there. I have a hope and I have a promise. I shared on Friday at the funeral about finishing off, because all the kids had seen photographs of all the kids with yellow t-shirts who were in primary school with Jeremiah 29:11 on the back. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. I've got plans, I've got a future, and I've got a hope for you. And so I want you to know in this place today that God has a plan and a purpose for you. And I don't care who you are, how much you've been running, what you've been running away from, what you have done in your life. God created you with a plan and with a purpose. Do you know what that plan is? Because very often we can know what we're running away from, but we don't know what we're running to. And that's what happens with Hagar. She's preoccupied with, and she answers the question, I'm running away from my mistress. I'm running away from a mess that someone else created. I'm trying to run away from that. I'm trying to get away from that. But I don't actually know where I'm going. All I know is that I'm running away. And I've hit a brick wall. Maybe that's you today, and you've hit a brick wall at times in your life. Maybe you've hit that brick wall today. And so she's told to go back. Go back to your mistress. Go back to Abram and Sarah. Go back and submit to her. But God's going to bless this. God is actually going to bless this mess. It should never have happened, but God's going to bless this. You're going to give him the name Ishmael. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago whenever we talked about God being our provider. And then in verse 13 it says, she gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. You are the God who sees me. And now I have seen the one who sees me. I gather that at the point that she stopped, that at the point that she hit that brick wall, she probably never felt so alone in all of her life. She probably felt like at that moment, no one knows, no one sees, and maybe even she's thinking and saying to herself, no one cares. She's hit this brick wall, and nobody knows that she's hit the brick wall. Nobody can see her. She's by herself. I don't know if you've ever maybe been in that place. And then God intervenes. Someone comes along and intervenes in her life. An angel, maybe Jesus himself, comes along into the middle of her mess because he sees her. God sees her. God just doesn't see a woman, sitting, but God actually sees right into her heart. Sees right into her soul. Sees right into the mess that she's now living with. He sees it all. And he intervenes. He intervenes. And I want you to know today that God sees you. God sees you. He sees right through your pain, right through your anguish, your grief, your suffering, your trauma. He sees right into your heart, right into your soul, right into your spirit, and he knows. He knows. He knows. I love how, in this story of this woman that's sitting here, and he doesn't just see and watch from afar. Well, let's see how this unfolds. Let's see what happens here. Let's see what she decides to do. No, God comes and intervenes in the middle of her mess. That's what he consistently does. He intervenes in the middle of our mess, in the middle of our grief, in the middle of our loneliness and depression and messes. He intervenes. He comes. He is a personal God. He is a relational God. We've sang about it today. He is our Father who sees us. He sees this community. He sees the darkness. He sees the messes. So that's why we sing the song, I speak Jesus in the darkness. I speak Jesus in the streets. I speak Jesus from the mountains, because whenever we speak the name of Jesus, we speak the name of one who intervenes in the darkness and one who intervenes in the mess. In Mark chapter 6, it says, immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to Bethsaida while he dismissed the crowd. After leaving them, he went up the mountainside to pray. Later that night, the boat was in the middle of the lake, and he was alone on the land. And he saw, verse 48, he saw the disciples straining at the oars. And he comes down the mountain and he walks on water to the boat where the disciples were straining at the oars. This is what he does. He doesn't just watch from afar, but he sees. He sees and he intervenes. He sees and he comes, walking on water into the middle of our mess, and he intervenes. If you know anything about the story that we've just read, it's just after the feeding of the 5,000, and says that Jesus made the disciples get into the boat. These disciples were fishermen. They knew what it was to sail on this sea, and they're straining at the oars, and he doesn't leave them. He goes, because what he has done is he has sent them to go to the other side of the lake on this journey. And they come up against a storm. He comes in the middle of the storm and he says, I'm going to go with you to the other side. I saw you straining at the oars. I saw you struggling in the midst of the storm. I saw you whenever you hit that brick wall. I see you. He's the God who sees. Worship team, you can come. Mark chapter 6. Let me finish with just a couple of things, a couple of thoughts. Mark chapter 6. John chapter 1. John chapter 1, Jesus has called his disciples. And it's obviously in the early part of his ministry, whenever he's just beginning. And he calls Philip and Andrew and Peter. They're from the town of Bethsaida, which they were just about to row to or trying to in Mark chapter 6. And it says in John chapter 1, the next day Jesus decided to leave for Galilee. Finding Philip, he said to him, follow me. And Philip, like Andrew and Peter, from the town of Bethsaida, found Nathanael and says to Nathanael, we'll find the one that Moses wrote about, the one that the prophets wrote about, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. And then Nathanael's response is, Nazareth? Can anything good come out of Nazareth? And then Philip says, well, why don't you come and see? Come and see for yourself. This is what these leaflets are about. Pick them up at the back. Come and see. This is to do with the event in September. You write the names down of people that you want to come and see Jesus. He says to Nathanael, come and see. Nathanael is approaching him. And Jesus prophesies into his life. Here is a true Israelite in whom there's no deceit. Nathanael asks a question, how is it that you know me? And Jesus answers, I saw you. I saw you while you were under the fig tree before Philip called you. I don't know what this means to Nathanael, but Nathanael's response is, yes, you are the Messiah. You are who these men have been saying you are. Because Jesus saw him. I saw you under the fig tree. I don't know if Nathanael was going through some stuff at that moment in time where he's thinking about life, he's thinking about his journey, he's thinking about stuff that has been going on, that stuff that went wrong, stuff that get messed up. It wasn't supposed to go that way. And Jesus says, I saw you. I saw you, Nathanael. Because he's the God who sees. He sees you today, church. He sees you. He saw this woman, Hagar, when she hit that brick wall. He saw the disciples straining in the middle of the storm. He saw Nathanael sitting by the fig tree. And he sees you today. He sees you. And that ought to bring us comfort. That ought to bring us comfort, knowing that we're not actually alone. That whenever we hit that brick wall, or whenever we're straining at the oars in the middle of the storm, or whenever we're sitting by a fig tree or whatever tree it is, knowing I am not alone. He sees me. He's with me. He's watching over me. That ought to fill us with so much comfort, so much joy. And he sees us. He sees me. Hagar's response in Genesis chapter 16. You're the God who sees me. I have now seen the one who sees me. You see, it's one thing knowing he sees me. It's one thing having that understanding. He sees me. But I wonder today, do you see him watching you? There's nothing like locking eyes with him. As we raise our children, whenever they're at this age and younger, we watch them. We watch them whenever they're sleeping, and whenever they're just babies, and you're just amazed at this little life that you have responsibility for, and you watch them. You'll sit and you just be mesmerized just by this little thing in a cot, in a basket, and you're like, wow. And you watch. But there's nothing more precious than whenever that little one looks back at you and they see you watching them. I don't think there's anything more precious than that. When you're feeding that little one and you're watching as you feed that little one and their eyes get fixed on your eyes. There's nothing like it. There's nothing like it. God sees you. And I wonder today, can we look up and see him? Because when our eyes clock on his eyes, there's nothing like it. There's nothing like it. Help us see you, Jesus. Help our eyes be fixed on your eyes. Can we stand, please, as we come to a close? I want to pray over us today as we leave this place. Maybe you're in this place today and maybe you thought, you know what? Yeah, I've hit that brick wall. I've been in that storm. I thought I was alone, but maybe God was with me and I didn't even realize it. It's very often that can happen because angels come in many different forms, many different shapes and sizes, and I want you to know that God has been watching over you. But maybe You're thinking, okay, you know what? God sees me, but I've never really seen him. Help me see him. Maybe you want to see him today. I encourage you to give your life to him, to surrender your life to him.